Often, fan fiction can be quite disorientating, to say the least. You wouldn't be wrong to say that about 90% of all fan fiction is quite bad. And even then, I might be being generous with that figure there. But it gets to the point where some fan fiction is just downright awful and is an insult to your intelligence. So I offer to those who've had to experience such crap a dose of, shall we say, literary sanity. So today, I will be reading the prologue of Stephen King's novel, The Dead Zone. Our story begins. By the time he graduated from college, John Smith had forgotten all about the bad fall he took on the ice that January day in 1953. In fact, he would have been hard put to remember it by the time he graduated from grammar school, and his mother and father never knew about it at all. They were skating on a cleared patch of Runaround Pond in Durham. The bigger boys were playing hockey with old tape sticks and using a couple of potato baskets for goals. The little kids were just farting around the way little kids have done since their memorial, their ankles bowing comically in and out, their breath puffing in the frosty 20-degree air. At one corner of the cleared ice, 2 rubber tires burned suitably, and a few parents sat nearby, watching their children. The age of the snowmobile was still distant, and winter fun still consisted of exercising your body rather than a gasoline engine. Johnny had walked down from his house just over the Pownell Lane, with his skates hung over his shoulder. At 6, he was a pretty fair skater. Not good enough to join in the big kids' hockey games yet, but able to skate rings around most of the other first graders, who were always pinwheeling their arms for balance or sprawling on their butts. Now he skated slowly around the outer edge of the clear patch, wishing he could go backward like Timmy Benedict's, listening to the ice thud and crackle mysteriously under the snow cover farther out. Also listening to the shouts of the hockey players, the rumble of a pulp truck crossing the bridge on its way to the U.S. Gypsum in Libson Falls, the murmur of conversation from the adults. He was very glad to be alive on that cold, fair winter day. Nothing was wrong with him. Nothing troubled his mind. He wanted nothing, except to be able to skate backward like Timmy Benedict's. He skated past the fire and saw that 2 or 3 of the grown-ups were passing around a bottle of booze. "Give me some of that," he shouted to Chuck Spire, who was bundled up in a big lumberjack shirt and green flannel snow pants. Chuck grinned at him. "Get out of here, kid. I hear your mother calling you." Grinning, 6-year-old Johnny Smith skated on, and on the roadside of the skating area, he saw Timmy Benedict himself, coming down the slope with his father behind him. "Timmy," he shouted, "watch this!" He turned around and began to skate clumsily backward. Without realizing it, he was skating to the area of the hockey game. "Hey, kid!" someone shouted. "Get out of the way!" Johnny didn't hear. He was doing it. He was skating backward. He had caught the rhythm all at once. It was in a kind of sway of the legs. He looked down, fascinated to see what his legs were doing. The big kid's hockey puck, old and scarred and gouged around the edges, buzzed past him, unseen. One of the big kids, not a very good skater, was chasing it with what was almost a blind, headlong plunge. Chuck Spire saw it coming. He rose to his feet and shouted, "Johnny, watch out!" John raised his head, and the next moment, the clumsy skater, all 160 pounds of him, crashed into little John Smith at full speed. Johnny went flying, arms out. A bare moment later, his head connected with the ice, and he blacked out. Blacked out. Black ice. Blacked out. Black ice. Black. Black. They told him that he'd blacked out. All he was really sure of was that strange repeating thought, and suddenly looking up at a circle of faces. Scared hockey players, worried adults, curious little kids, Timmy Benedict smirking. Chuck Spire was holding him. Black ice. Black. "What?" Chuck asked Johnny. "You okay? You took a hell of a knock." "Black," Johnny said gutturally. "Black ice. Don't jump it no more, Chuck." Chuck looked around, a little scared, then back at Johnny. He touched the large knot that was rising on the boy's forehead. "I'm sorry," the clumsy hockey player said. "I never even saw him. Little kids are supposed to stay away from the hockey. It's rules." He looked around uncertainly for his support. "Johnny," Chuck said. He didn't like the look of Johnny's eyes. They were dark and far away, distant and cold. "Are you okay?" "Don't jump it no more," Johnny said, unaware of what he was saying, thinking only of ice, black ice, the explosion, the acid. "Think we ought to take him to the doctor?" Chuck asked Bill Gendron. "You don't know what he's saying." "Give him a minute," Bill advised. They gave him a minute, and Johnny's head did clear. "I'm okay," he muttered. "Let me up." Timmy Benedict was still smirking, damn him. Johnny decided he would show Timmy a thing or two. He would be skating rings around Timmy by the end of the week, backward and forward. "You come on over and sit down by the fire for a while," Chuck said. "You take a hell of a knock." Johnny let them help him over to the fire. The smell of melting rubber was strong and pungent, making him feel a little sick to his stomach. He had a headache. He felt the lump over his left eye curiously. It felt as though it stuck out a mile. Can you remember who you are and everything? Sure I can. I'm okay. Who's your dad and mom? Herb and Vera Smith. Bill and Chuck looked at each other and shrugged. I think he's okay, Chuck said. And then, for the third time, but he sure took a hell of a knock, didn't he? Wow. Kids, Bill said, looking fondly out at his 8-year-old twin girls skating hand in hand and then back at Johnny. He probably would have killed a grown-up. Not a Pollock, Chuck replied, and then both burst out laughing. The bottle of Bushmills began making its round again. 10 minutes later, Johnny was back out on the ice. His head ache already fading, the knotted bruise standing out on his forehead like a weird brand. By the time he went home for lunch, he had forgotten all about the fall and blacking out, in the joy of having discovered how to skate backwards. God's mercy, Vera Smith said when she saw him. How did you get that? Fell down, he said, and began to slurp up Campbell's tomato soup. Are you all right, John? She asked, touching it gently. Sure, Mom. He was too, except for the occasional bad dreams that came over the course of the next month or so. The bad dreams and a tendency to get very doozy, at times of the day when he'd never been doozy before. And that stopped happening about the same time the bad dreams stopped happening. He was all right. In mid-February, Chuck Spire got up one morning and found that the battery of the old 48 DeSoto was dead. He tried to jump it from his farm truck. As he attached the second clamp to the DeSoto's battery, it exploded in his face, showering him with fragments of corrosive battery acid. He lost an eye. Vera said it was God's own mercy he hadn't lost them both. Johnny thought it was a terrible tragedy and went with his father to visit Chuck in Lewiston General Hospital a week after the accident. The sight of Big Chuck lying in that hospital bed, looking oddly wasted and small, had shaken Johnny badly, and that night he had dreamed that it was him lying there. From time to time, in the years afterward, Johnny had hunches. He would know what the next record on the radio was going to be before the DJ had played it. That sort of thing. But he never connected these with the accident on the ice, but by then he had forgotten it. And the hunches were never that startling, or even very frequent. It was not until the night of the county fair and the mask that anything very startling happened, before the second accident. Later, he thought of that often. The thing with the Wheel of Fortune had happened before, like the second accident, like a warning from his own childhood. Riveting stuff, ain't it? Well, I hope those who have read terrible fanfiction have feel better, and maybe I'll do this again, for some of those more traumatic experiences. So until next time, stay sane, everybody, because reading bad fanfiction, that stuff can fuck with ya. Believe me.